I'm going to start with the introductions on behalf of the Harvard Club of Southern California, Harvard Club of San Diego, and Harvard Club of Sacramento. I want to thank you for joining us in this Harvard Speak virtual event. The Harvard Club of Southern California is one of the largest and most active Harvard alumni clubs in the world, and we're delighted to be able to sponsor this event with Harvey Mansfield. My name is Neil Morgenbesser. I'm Harvard College class of '86 and the director of the Harvard Speak LA program, which brings the opportunity to the broader alumni community for some intellectually and academically stimulating interactions with some of the most stellar Harvard faculty members. I want to thank Roger Green from the Harvard Club of San Diego for being the initiator of this event, and John Reinen from the Harvard Club of Sacramento for also co-sponsoring the event. In 2025, Harvard Speak LA has featured Harvard professors on a variety of topics, including the California wildfires, extraterrestrial intelligence, the demise of Jim Crow, civil discourse at Harvard, America's governing crisis, the latest developments in genetics, Shakespeare and Marlowe, and fairness in the workplace. In 2026, we've hosted Dr. Robert Waldinger on what makes us happy, and we've confirmed upcoming events with Professor Cass Sunstein on his nudge theory, and former Harvard Law School Dean Martha Minow on predicates for constitutional self-government. Today, we're extremely excited to be able to welcome back Professor Harvey C. Mansfield, the Kennan Research Professor of Government at Harvard University. One of the longest-serving professors in Harvard's history, Professor Mansfield entered Harvard College as an undergraduate in 1949. Following his studies in England on a Fulbright scholarship and his service in the U.S. military, Professor Mansfield returned to Harvard and received his PhD in 1961. After a short stint as a lecturer at UC Berkeley, Professor Mansfield returned to Harvard in 1962, this time permanently, teaching for over 60 years until his retirement in 2023. While at Harvard, Professor Mansfield was known, one might say notorious, for being an outspoken conservative voice on the Harvard faculty, taking positions on everything from affirmative action to grade inflation. Indeed, his position on the later topic earned him the well-known moniker Harvey C. Mansfield. We have a lot to talk about. It's my pleasure to welcome Professor Mansfield back to Harvard Speak LA and open this conversation with him. Let me start by asking, the title of the conversation is My Two Harvard Books, so tell us a little bit about your two Harvard books and what has prompted you to write them.
Sure, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure. Well, I like a salesman, I can show you a copy.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
you muted yourself.
Professor Mansfield, somehow you're on mute.
Not Roger Mansfield, Harvey Mansfield.
Yes.
So I was.
Yes, you were showing us a copy. That's where we lost you.
All right. Here it is again, so as not to miss it. That's an academic book published by Harvard Press, and it consists of my notes that for a course that I taught for most of those 60 years I taught at Harvard in alternate years, I'll point out, and called Government 1061. It was not a popular course, hugely inhabited, but I don't know. It left a mark on some people. Then the other book that I have and is not yet quite available is Where Harvard Went Wrong. And this consists of things that I wrote over the last 50 years about Harvard. I'll read you the subtitle is 50 Years of Commentary That Fell on Deaf Ears. So that has sort of things I wrote mainly for the Crimson, but also for other sources. And the arguments would work at any university, but the figures are all at Harvard. So that consists of, well, the two things you mentioned, affirmative action and grade inflation. You know, I spent all of those 60 years usually pretty much by myself, criticizing affirmative action and great inflation. And I thought they were two lost causes. But all I had to do was retire, and suddenly the Supreme Court turned the affirmative action question totally in my direction. And Harvard at last, though it had the faculty had a meeting today, actually, um, on great inflation, acting on great inflation. So my lost causes now seem to be won, or at least much improved from my point of view. So where Harvard went wrong, um, that's about Harvard more or less today, with the understanding that I'm retired and I'm not in the loop so as to know things that are current, either in the administration or the faculty, but I can guess, especially about the faculty. So, so what questions?
Well, let's talk about where Harvard went wrong, but maybe let's take a step back. What is the function of a university to begin with? And what is the function of a university, particularly in a democratic republic? I mean, there's always been this tension at Harvard between elitism and democracy, and how is that part of what's going wrong? Just from a bigger picture, and then we'll drill into the specifics of Harvard recently.
Yeah, well, that's very much taken up in this book. So, Claudine Gay, Harvard president who lost her job after 6 months, began by announcing that for her, the ivory tower no longer described things correctly. Now Harvard was going to be a part of society. So there, I think she stated very well and very clearly the issue over the main issue over Harvard today, and that is what is Harvard? How independent is it? And what does it mean to be an ivory tower? That's a medieval symbol, by the way, and a university is not a modern thing. It was invented in the Middle Ages, so it's older than Harvard is. So an ivory tower is something that's fragile and pure, and that rises above. It has its foundation in the ground, that is in the country where it's located, but it rises above that country. That means it's not fundamentally concerned with the political disputes of that country, or at least with participating in them, which is what Claudine Gay went on to do, and which was her unfortunate fall. But it's looking longer and higher at the issues of today. So free speech, for example, what is free and how is speech, how does that make you free? And what is speech? Those are questions which aren't taken up by the political actors, but that can be the stuff of what a university does. So I think that's the beginning and the most fundamental point. What is the source of Harvard's independence that it's now trying to defend? Claudine Gay wanted to give it up, a part of society she wanted Harvard to be, and she found out what that meant. Smacked in the gob by Elise Stefanik. That was no fun for her. So, but on the other hand, Harvard does science, modern science, based on laboratories, extremely expensive, with experiments. No way that a university can pay for modern science. If it wants to do research in science, it has to get money from somewhere, no doubt the federal government. So, and there are other occasions that arise, moral issues like the atrocity of Hamas in 2023, October 7th. And isn't that something that one needs to react to or take note of? And of course, then when Harvard was during World War II, Harvard was taken over by I think the U.S. Navy, and so there are reminders that Harvard belongs in and has to be grateful to the United States of America. But its purpose is seeking the truth. It's not bringing justice. Bringing justice is what our political system does, and seeking truth. What is justice, after all? What does it require of us? What are the different views? That's you have to read Plato for that. So that's what I would say.
Okay, so where did Harvard go wrong? Is this a short-term issue, a long-term issue, and is it self-correcting?
To answer the last part, it's certainly not self-correcting, but yeah, yes. I mean, the main sign of it is that the university is dominated by the left, by one party. And that began in the late 60s with the student revolts that politicized the university, said that the university was on the side of the government and its terrible war in Vietnam. It was complicit. So it needed to be protested. And this was done with some violence, much more than what we've seen recently today. I think so. The late 60s, if I can just use that phrase, I think people generally know what that means. I think that's how it got started. When I came to Harvard, it was still mostly Republican, and of course, students couldn't vote, most of them, undergraduates at that time, but it's still there. It was clear that Eisenhower, maybe the first Eisenhower election in 1952, but then the next one in 1956, that was they already wanted Stevenson, and Harvard was becoming more meritocratic, with fewer old families, prep school kids, and so on. And the liberals were taking over, which they did modestly. This also coincided with the arrival of Jews in the faculty, who became quite a number of them very quickly. So and these were all liberals. My father was like that. He was a professor too at Ohio State and Columbia. So well, it was it was I might say a Cold War liberal, and that they were perfectly, my department in about 1960, 61 was perfectly willing to take me on, knowing that I was on the right and a kind of conservative. And most of them, until the late 60s, were sort of at least possibly on my side in issues that arose. But after that, after the late 60s, that which caused a great division in the department, that gradually there was a takeover by the left. And well, perhaps the main feature of that was feminism. That feminism came from the left. The two greatest feminist founders, or at least of 20th century feminism, Simone de Beauvoir and Betty Friedan. Well, Betty Friedan was briefly a communist, and Simone de Beauvoir called herself an historical Marxist. So they brought from the left a way of understanding which was new for the university, which they called raising consciousness, which is a kind of Marxist way of speaking. So they would introduce new terms like MS. You mustn't talk about a woman and her relation to a man. So you must use the term MS, which is neither Miss nor Mrs. So, and that's an example of rational control. So you take over that usage and make it yours. There was never a vote to do this. It was just done, and it caught on. So feminism brought many women professors to the faculty, and liberal professors who might have been willing to take on a conservative or two along the way used up their, so you might say, toleration for something new on those women. And the women who came, since they had arrived through affirmative action, and since they were feminists, were insistent that other women who were hired be on the left as well. So you had all these women coming to the universities, and none of them conservatives. So this is one way. This is a quick summary of how things happened. The main danger now, or the biggest fault in the universities, is lack of conservatives, and that a total domination by the left. And when I say the left, the majority are sort of liberals and not that far to the left, but when it comes to an issue, they look to the left and not to the right for sustenance or for.
So how do you fix that? I mean, at first, my name's Eric Weiss, by the way. I went to Harvard in 1989. I'm sorry to hear that you retired, Professor Mansfield, because now I think there's only one or two conservative professors still left over at Harvard. But how do you fix that? How do you bring in more conservatives, both professors and students?
It's easier with the students than with the professors, because the students come and go in 4 years, and you can change that number pretty quickly. But the professors are the problem, especially since, according to academic freedom, professors have to be chosen by professors. So and now say my Department of Government, as far as I know, is not thinking of hiring a conservative, and hasn't done so for 15 years or something like that. In fact, I don't think Harvard has hired a single conservative in any department, at least where it's visible in the social sciences and humanities, for decades. So that they know. So how do you turn that around? And that's going to take a little bit of very difficult coercion from the Harvard president to say that you won't get any, you in the government department or whatever department won't get any new appointments unless you do a couple of conservatives first. And then there's the problem of the pool, the supply. The supply of conservatives is not is not large, since they haven't been concerned with academia uh, for some time now. It hasn't been a way for a conservative kid to get a job. So that'll be difficult. There are a number of right-wing think tanks like AEI, Heritage, and Hudson Institute, Hoover, where you see people who would be professors if they weren't conservative. So you can empty them out, but there aren't that many around to do. Then you see in the South, or especially in red states with conservative governors and legislatures, are using their state universities to bring in conservatives under the name of civics. So that's in Florida, Tennessee, North Carolina, Ohio, some few places like that, so that my students are able now to get jobs. All my PhD students had the devil's of difficulty to get a job for all this time.
I want to mention something. I've got a daughter-in-law who tried to get into med school recently,
Yeah.
and she came to me and asked me to look at some of her essays. And the questions that they had on these essays were, please tell us about a time that you were discriminated against.
Yeah.
Please tell us about a time, what would you do with your free time if you become a doctor to help the community? And they had no questions on the other side of the aisle having anything to do with the fact that you were already working 80 hours a week to try and make money to pay down the bills for your education, that maybe if you had any free time, you could actually have a family and not get divorced. No, that
Yeah.
wasn't going to be looked at as any type of a proper answer. It all had to do with not only you're basically having to act like you're a communist or you're an affirmative action proponent or that you've been discriminated against in order to have any chance of getting a good grade, because of the slanting of these questions made it quite obvious that if you were conservative, you were not wanted in their program.
No, I think that happens, and it happens everywhere. All the prestigious universities and even the non-prestigious ones have gone in for tendentious questions and demands. So I'm sorry for your daughter, but it's yeah, that's the way it's been. So
from a political control, I mean, you're a political philosopher, and so one of the questions, we've had some pre-submitted questions, but definitely if people have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or if, like Eric, you want to just jump in, that's fine too, if it doesn't get out of control. But when we think about governance of the university, is there a proper way, a better way for it to be done? I mean, obviously faculty are going to have a particular point of view. I don't think the administration is going to be any better. We have this bizarre corporation. At some point, do we have to be happy that the government is out there interfering in the role of private universities? Is that the answer? I mean, how do we think about how would be the optimal way to design governance of a university?
We don't have an optimal way. And I think Harvard is lucky to have Alan Garber as president right now. I think he's quite moderate, and I think he's headed in a direction of reform of this terrible politicization and lack of viewpoint diversity. That's a phrase that's used, meaning lack of conservatives. So I think he's trying, but you're right, the main difficulty is in the faculty. Because a professor is not a team player. He makes his own living, so to speak, without having to work for an employer who tells him what to do. So you're used to getting your own way, at least in your own things, and you're not used to looking at Harvard, how its reputation is in America, how it is disliked by half of America.
Who cares?
That's terrible. Who cares? Yeah, that's exactly what happens. So, so you have to arrange things so that the faculty begins to care. And so then here I think of small items of coercion. But in general, there is this, that the scientists, because they need federal money, are willing to make a deal with the federal government. So they are sort of much more likely to be in favor of some kind of reform toward conservatism, and it's their colleagues in the humanities and social sciences who cause all the trouble, but and who don't get any money from the federal government and think themselves entitled to the way they've been so far. I don't think that in my department of political science, there's really any feeling that they've done something wrong. And I think that's pretty general. And then suddenly, say, this awful man Trump has come upon them and is hitting them right and left. And
So talk a little bit more about that. What is your view of government power being used in this way? And you made a comment to us before we got on, which is you see this as a phenomenon that likely outlasts Trump, the man, that the influence of the government over the conduct of the university should continue past the Trump presidency.
Well, Trump is the first Republican to attack the universities. But when he leaves, I don't think he'll be the last. I think that Republicans now will see that that is a popular issue, and that it's a grave defect in the way we're educating our kids. That one party sort of controls the whole. So so that's what I think with that and. I mean, as far as Trump goes, he always overdoes everything he does. But on the other hand, these faculties are like mules that need to be hit with a 2x4. They hit hard. Otherwise they will think that they've got the arguments on their side. And they can continue the status quo, and it's all they need is to elect a Democrat as president. That will help them, but I don't think it will solve their problem, because I think the Republicans now have their number and will come after them in the future.
I think one of the bigger problems that we're facing right now is the value of a Harvard education. I went there. I had to struggle to try and get good grades. There was no grade inflation when I was there, it didn't seem to me, unless I was particularly dumb compared to some of my compatriots. But I worked hard and finally ended up graduating with good grades. But now I'm looking at my kids. I had 6 children, and none of them I thought would have benefited from me paying $70,000 a year to send my kid to a place that would teach him how to hate his father and hate his mother and hate the values of patriotism and family that they grew up with. And I am surrounded out here in East County in San Diego with contractors who are making millions of dollars a year, having never gone to college and just learned a trade. They learned how to be an electrical contractor or a plumber, and they've got 20 people working under them, and now they're making $1.3 million bucks a year. And I have to ask myself, wouldn't I be better off if my kids are motivated and ambitious to send them to a trade school? Because if you've ever tried to go hire a plumber or an electrician or a painter, you now find that they're charging twice what they should be charging, and you can't get them to come for 3 or 4 months. They're in huge demand.
Yeah, I think you are justly annoyed. And, but by the way, Harvard has a whole lot of scholarships. I've forgotten the salary that you need to have in order to get a scholarship, but at least half the students have something, and there's maybe a quarter who are there on a full ride and don't have to pay anything. So, so with your 6 kids, you might be a candidate for goodwill.
We've got a few questions from the chat, so I'll start on that. I'll get back to Tina's question, but let me start on the Harvard questions. John Ryan asks, do you consider it helpful that John Manning was made dean of the law school and then provost, as many but not all would consider him a conservative?
Yes, I do. I thought that was a good thing and a good sign.
Yeah. And Jeff Kirchhaven asks, what would you do, Professor Mansfield, if all of a sudden you became president of Harvard?
Something like what I suggested, to tell various departments that their next 2 appointments had to be conservatives. It doesn't have to be 50-50. In fact, just a few conservatives would make a big difference, because it would show a trend and it would show a new attitude. And so you don't have to look on this as an impossible trick, as a weighty matter which nobody can do anything about. Just to change the questions that are put to applicants, things like that. Those changes have all been made against good sense, and now I think they can be reversed and ask the right questions and behave as if we have 2 parties in this country, and a few extras on the side too.
Okay, well, we'll switch to Tina's question, which is, doesn't feminism always arise as empires collapse? What has happened after previous empires collapsed? And I think we can think about feminism, we can think about the decline of masculinity if we want to think about your other book here. But is there a historical perspective on this?
Yeah, my other book, Manliness, came out quite a while ago, like 20 years, which was a kind of modest defense of manliness. At the end of that, I predicted difficulty, because I thought it was very bad that men who want to be men can't find any employment as men. The unemployment of manliness, I think, is a big problem. We're seeing that now with gender gap in elections and a general lassitude among males, punctuated by horrific acts of violence. And I think that Trump appeals to that sort of person. And as you see, I have my doubts about him, but I do think he is right when he argues that we have 2 sexes. That's common sense, and that we should be ruled by common sense and not by psychologists or professors in this matter. So,
okay, but just expanding on Tina's question then, are there historical parallels to this? Are there other times that we've lost our senses?
Well, it's hard to say. There is a kind of history of manliness in America. But well, feminism used to be quite different from what it is today. In the 19th century, women claimed the right to vote because they were more moral than men are. And maybe that was the beginning of the trouble, but they said, we'll clean up our corrupt politics. We got drunk husbands, and the sort of combination of prohibition and vote for women will tamper down manliness. Men do need to be tampered down. That's true. So, but you have to find women who agree with that, but see, as one of them said, I put this in my book, that a man needs to feel he's important. So that we've got to recover that notion. And strangely enough, it was the progressives in the early 20th century, like Teddy Roosevelt, yeah, who are great promoters of manliness. But you catch me with little to say on the historical question of decline of empires due to lack of manliness.
So, okay, let's come back to Harvard then. So if you were advising a young 16 or 17-year-old thinking about what to do, would you advise coming to Harvard? And if so, what advice would you give as they come into Harvard in terms of how they should expect it to work and design it to work?
I would advise them to come to Harvard. All the other places are the same and they have Harvard's ills. But they don't have Harvard's greatest feature, which is, as everybody says, your fellow students are pretty good at Harvard. And those are the people that you'll meet, become friends with, and now alumni with. So, it is possible to make your way through the course catalog carefully. As when you arrive, you need to consult with sensible seniors or juniors or senior people who've taken courses. I'm essentially assuming that you're asking about a conservative kid, but how to survive it at Harvard.
Well, I think you should do both. I
Yeah,
continue this, but then
right.
a normal, moderate, apolitical.
All right. Yes. Sure. Try to find courses with honest professors who don't try to proselytize and politicize, and get some advice from other students or from any source, including your parents, as to what courses to take. That's what's really difficult these days, because students get enticed by courses with sexy titles or trendy or immediate reference to immediate problems, and they don't do well. You get a transcript that has a whole lot of crazy choices, and the faculty allows this and encourages this. So you have to be careful and distrustful. But your reward is, at the end of it, you get a better education than the people who just take what's offered. Because you go into a course not thinking that the professor is a demigod who is every expression should be endorsed, but be more critical, thinking more, thinking harder. So that's really good.
Got it. So are you optimistic or pessimistic about the future of Harvard?
I'm always optimistic because it doesn't pay to be a pessimist. And so I think we'll get past this. But it will take a while. Some people are going to have to move out, and others will have to die before uh, a, a full reform can be accorded. I'm it's partly I love the place, spent my life there, and don't think it was wasted.
Professor Mansfield, you mentioned that there's a rise of feminism, and one of the things that Elon Musk has commented on is that the worst potential problem, and not even potential, but the worst problem we're facing in America right now is declining birth rates. We're now down to 1.6 children per woman in the United States, which means that we have to either import a whole bunch of new people in order to make sure that our pension funds don't go bankrupt, or we have to try and get people producing children again, which doesn't seem to be a very easy thing to do. Would you have any comments on whether feminism might be a big part of this collapse in birth rates, or any other aspects that might have contributed to it?
I'm sure you're right. I mean, you don't seem to have had any trouble. So you can offer yourself as an example. But the prime minister of feminism, Simone de Beauvoir, had very nasty things to say of motherhood. So and these were moderated when it came to America. And Betty Friedan, in her book The Feminine Mystique, did accept that a woman could choose to be a mother, but it isn't something that you do normally or sometimes gracefully. It has to be a choice that you think of as a sacrifice, and that to have a child, and that's very unfortunate. I had 3 children, and I had a great time with them, and so I think I wouldn't. It isn't something I'd want to lose, and it is our country. I mean, um, on the question of feminism or birth control, it might be possible to do the opposite of our policy on abortions and understand birth control as producing more kids rather than fewer. And that is in the first chapter of my book, The Rise and Fall of Rational Control. As Machiavelli wrote a play called The Mandragola, in which the plot consists of a couple that wants to have a child and how they manage to do it. So rational control might be able to help us out with some features. Thing is, things that have been tried so far, various incentives, haven't worked. So, and I think you are definitely right that feminism is part, not entirely, but part of the trouble or the cause for this. It does seem that as societies become richer, that the women become less eager to have children, or the men too. We've got more wealth and we want to share it less.
we have a saying that I've used many times in my business with a lot of the other people that we talk to, and it's that hard times produce hard men produce easy times produce men who are weak, and weak men produce hard times. And it's like a cycle that you seemingly go throughout history in which having luxury enervates the people who created it. And the next generation, it grows up entitled and filled with grievance and resentment, even though they're richer than they have any right to be. And how do you break out of that cycle?
That's good. I should have said that when asked about history. That was Greek wisdom you just gave. That good times tend to be followed by bad times. So it's hard to know which is better, to be born in good times, which are going to get bad, or in bad times, which are going to get good. That's a very unhistorical way to think.
Anybody else have any questions? I'll open it to the floor.
Let me tell you something about rational control before you go.
Okay.
And what it is. And what it is an alternative to persuasion. If you try to persuade somebody, that person may agree with you or may not. And often it's not. And that's because human beings have a reluctance to be bossed around and told what to think or to do. So rational control is a way to use your reason through somebody else's unreason or non-reason. And so an example of it is an incentive. So you're giving, tax time right now. You've got these gifts that you make, and you get a tax incentive for making that gift. So you're doing something which is virtuous, but then there's a little bit of something in it for you as well. Or another example I see around Cambridge is speed bumps. The city of you doesn't come to you and say, you're driving too fast. Here's why, and give you a list of reasons. You probably may shake your head. And instead, they just install a speed bump without any consent required or sought. And behind it is something called anger management. And that's a psychological viewpoint, which says that people can be affected and directed to do good without having a good motive or without thinking, but just you're afraid of that bump. So it's fear. And fear is something which weighs upon you without your not being able to set aside. So fear goes with a necessity. Fear goes along with what you find it necessary, that is urgent to do. And that is Machiavelli. Machiavelli says, what people think is good leads to imaginations of things that might be good and ways to get them. But if you're afraid, then necessity is right in front of you, and you won't ignore it. You'll slow down for that speed bump. So that's the beginning of my book, and tells you a little bit of something what rational control is, which I think is characteristic of modern thinking in psychology, in economics, in political science. If you
I appreciate you talking about the book also. So you discuss each of 8 different philosophers, and at
Yeah.
the end, Nietzsche kind of brings the end to the modern period. Why does he kind of destroy the modern period?
He speaks of nihilism. And nihilism is especially the impotence of reason. We don't really have any reason. Today, for example, scientists think very hard about their science, but they can't prove that science is good for us. That's really not a question that they can address. So that's the difficulty they have. And if you spend all your life working hard at some problem or in some field, and then decide at the end of it that you can't say whether it's good or bad, that's nihilism, nothingness. And that is how he understands rational control. That all modernity has done is to take all the interest in and strife and contentiousness and interest out of our lives, all the manliness out of our men, and leaving nothing. That's why he understands rational control to have evolved, leaving a problem that all of us face. I think Nietzsche is today's most comprehensive and dominant philosopher. That all the philosophers since him have been his sort of doctoral students. He's mentored them all. So if you want to read, say, about today and the problems of today, say the most eye-opening author to do it with is Nietzsche. But, and this is what I say to the students, don't fall in love with him.
Falling in love with the devil would not be a good thing.
Yeah.
It's funny how Nietzsche didn't talk about the Übermensch being a Nazi, but the Nazis certainly grabbed hold of the Übermensch to justify everything that they did.
They did. They liked him. He wouldn't have liked them, but they liked him.
Yes. I used to have a license plate that said Übermensch on it. And until all of my Jewish clients ended up firing me because they thought I was a Nazi. Not just a Republican, but also a Nazi.
Yeah. All right. That's something to avoid.
Yes. So I changed that license plate. Don't have that anymore.
Yeah. Uber is all right. We found that out. It's the
Yes.
Uber. All right.
Well, yeah, thank you very much. I guess on the Nazi point, why don't we end with that? So what is your perspective on the rise of neo-Nazis in the ranks of Republicans, including young Republicans you see on campus and elsewhere? My theory is there's just a lack of any other sort of model for young men as they're growing up, particularly young men. And so the idea that they're going to rebel and lock on to things that upset the left it leads them into that kind of an extreme. But I don't know if that's right. And it's troubling to see it. It's troubling to see it at Harvard. It's troubling to see it elsewhere, even if it is a tiny fringe.
What you say sounds good to me.
Okay.
You've identified a big problem and understand it pretty well.
Well, I'm just taking your solution then.
Also, don't forget the Palestinians on the other side, on the extreme left. So those are 2 problems we have today.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thank you to everybody for participating. Special thank you to Professor Mansfield for doing this for us. And we understand you just celebrated your 94th birthday. And look forward to having you back next year for your 95th.
All right. 1 year at a time at my age.
Amen.
Exactly. Well, thank you, everybody. And there will be a recording left on the Harvard Club of Southern California website for people who want to access it there or tell friends about it. But thanks. And this concludes our program.